Wow, I didn't think that was going to work. Good afternoon again. My name is Ray Strickland. I'm a reporter, of course, with WKYC. I know there's a lot of Fox 8 viewers in here, so a lot of you probably don't know me. Hopefully after this event we can get the ratings up because of that. But of course, this is the 5th annual ODA Speaker Series. And of course, WKYC is a proud media sponsor of this event, and of course many others, including RPM. I just learned about that because of Randy over there. But I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. Yeah, he loves the company. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Ray. I'm a reporter with Channel 3. Born and raised in Akron, Ohio. My first job out of college was in North Dakota, Dickinson, North Dakota. If anyone has ever heard of that place, please raise your hand. No hands, of course, no one has ever heard of that place. But it's a small town in North Dakota on the western side of the state that no one has ever heard of, but definitely molded me into a pretty, I guess, decent reporter that led me to St. Louis after that, and then I was presented the opportunity to come back home here in Cleveland, or the greater Cleveland area, Northeast Ohio, and to become a reporter at WKYC. So I'm working Wednesday through Sunday, so if you guys want to tune in, I'm on at 11 o'clock. And I just want to say it's a really great station. I think it's the best. But on another note, I just want to say, I'm going to embarrass Anna Marie over here, but did anyone see her on Live on Lakeside or on We the People? Because I know a lot of people watch Channel 3. So give her a round of applause because she's out doing a really good job promoting ODA. But just want to give you a quick overview of kind of what's going to be happening today. Of course, we're going to hear from the one and only, the great author, Leslie Crutchfield. She is the keynote speaker. Of course, we're going to have a panel conversation where you're going to be able to ask questions to our panel, which is going to include Anne Marie, I believe, as well. Oh, not Anne Marie. No, I got that wrong. It's going to include Randy, I know for sure, and then some other amazing folks. And then we're going to hear from, of course, Von Williams, who is the ODA scholar. Give him a hand, too, by the way. Von Williams sits here with ODA. He's going to tell his story. We actually just heard about his story and kind of, he was just talking about how it changed his life, and you're going to hear a little bit about that. But first, I'm going to introduce everyone who I just met, by the way. Christina Schmidt. She is the Vice President of Marketing for Oswald Companies. Excuse me. Please give her a hand.
Good morning, and thank you, Ray, for the introduction. Oswald Companies is an employee-owned risk management and insurance firm, which is celebrating 125 years in Cleveland this year. Built on our core values of commitment to community, we invest in our communities and serve to inspire. Like Open Doors Academy, we know that by strengthening communities, we create more opportunities for people to thrive. We were thrilled last month to celebrate ODA in a big way and bestow a major $50,000 grant to the organization in honor of our 125th anniversary. We are very proud of our continued partnership. Thanks for your work, and thank you for having us today.
That chicken is good, isn't it? Had a mouthful. Oh, sorry, I'm going to finish that. All right, thank you, Christina, for that. Sorry, I had to get that chicken down. But one thing that I will say about ODA, and I learned this yesterday with Ed, was that we talked to a couple of students there. It was at E-Prep, I believe, Ed, and we were asking, like, what is one of your favorite parts about ODA? And I think Von even talked about it. It was a holiday party where, families got a chance to get together and learn more about the program and things of that nature. But every kid that we talked to, they said their favorite part about ODA, it involved food. So I'm pretty sure this is probably going to be on your list too, because that was some pretty good chicken. But thank you, Christina. Thank you to Oswald Companies. And now Please join me in welcoming to the stage ODA's president and CEO. We already talked about her, Anne-Marie Grassi. Dr. Anne-Marie Grassi.
Good morning. Morning. So I'm going to let you eat before I ask you for money. So we'll say that, oh, I'm sorry. I'm reading my notes ahead of the mark. So I want to start by just thanking everyone here for being here today. I'd like to start by recognizing our incredible board of directors who, without, as part of this team, we would not be where we are. So if I could ask our board of directors to please stand. I know you hate it when I ask you to do it, but please stand so we can recognize you. Thank you. I want to share with you that this year I put my board to a challenge, and I said to the board, I said, we really want this event to grow. We really want to see it be successful, and we really want to see us achieve some incredible goals in raising funds for our kids. And so I challenged my board that every single board member would either put up or bring forward a sponsorship for this event. Now, we've never done this before. We typically have about 50% board participation in fundraisers around sponsorships for a fundraiser like this. And this year, I am proud to say that 100% of the board secured a sponsorship for this event. So again, if we could give them a round of applause for helping us achieve that goal. So I'd also like to recognize some of our sponsors for this year's event. First and foremost, our visionary sponsor, Oswald Companies. Thank you, and thank you for your generous support over the years and for your incredibly generous gift of $50,000 this year. Our thought leader, RPM International. Our change agent sponsors, Cuyahoga Community College, Vistage, and Wells Fargo. Our tastemakers, including Lubrizol, Ratliff and Taylor, Nordson Corporation, Corman, Jackson and Krantz, the NRP Group, Tiroli, Sunheim, Cavell, and Tamino. And I would also like to thank all of our luminary sponsors, which you can see presented around the room, to our foundation sponsors for your continued support, and a special thanks to our media sponsor, WKYC, for helping shine a light on ODA and our out-of-school time programming for adolescents. Again, thank you to all of our sponsors. So why we are here? I'd like to provide a little bit of background on this year's luncheon. This is our 5th year. It is our most successful year to date. This year, the ODA speakers bring, doing good today. It's the chicken, I'm gonna blame it on the chicken. So the ODA Speaker Series brings national and international leaders in education and childhood development to Cleveland to discuss the problems and possibilities confronted by our kids today. Our goal is to enrich, enliven, and deepen the conversation about what these kids need to be truly successful. These thought-provoking speakers challenge us all to do more for our kids. Leslie definitely is going to challenge us to do more. As you listen to our speakers and guests today, I'm going to personally challenge each of you to think of a way that you can give to the kids of ODA. At each of your tables, there is a list of ways that you can give. For those of you who are able to make a gift of support for our work, thank you. There are other ways you can give too. The holiday season is fast approaching, and we'd love to have you join our Adopt a Family program. If you'd like to learn more about ODA, let us know that you would like to schedule a campus tour, and we'd be glad to take you around. Find a way to volunteer with ODA. We are creative, and so are you. Become a mentor to an ODA college scholar. Tell us how you would like to engage with ODA, and we'll contact you to make it happen. Now, for the time being, I'd like to quickly introduce Sherry Maxon, who has been a longtime supporter of ODA and recently signed up to be an e-mentor for one of our college students. Sherry, I'm going to ask you to turn to the back of the room. She's in the back corner, is going to share a few words about why she is a mentor in her own personal experience.
Thanks. I was attracted to the opportunity to mentor an ODA alum for a few reasons. A longtime supporter of Open Doors, I'd want to be hands-on, but I couldn't do the after-school hours. I had known for a long time that I had more love to give, but I couldn't find a youth-serving venue that worked around my other commitments. The program was appealing because it's one-on-one mentorship, scheduled individually, and it mixes in-person with email and text or phone contact. I feel really lucky because I genuinely adore my mentee. She asks to meet when she's in town. We text a few times a week. As I've told her, this arrangement is really a friendship. We get to shape it as we go. I enjoy being a part of her journey as she navigates her first year of college. I hear about her professors, her classes, life balance, finding the right on-campus job, managing food choices, and now she's pursuing scholarships. I do worry about that, and I have offered to proofread her applications as it would be truly heartbreaking if financial barriers change her path. We're only 2 months in, but I can already say that this program is life-changing for both of us, and it's been a really easy way for me to give. I hope you can join us. There's a spot on your clipboard where you can sign up.
Thank you, Sherry, for your commitment to ODA and to our scholars. In a minute, you're going to hear from an incredible young man, Vaughn, and I know at the end of this day, there are going to be 20 of you that run to a table to mentor Vaughn. But just know that Vaughn is one of hundreds, and there are so many kids out there that need mentors. If you are able to give just a little bit of time each month, we would value and appreciate the opportunity to connect you with one of our kids. So for now, you can sign up at the clipboards at your table, or you can visit our Adopt a Family station or our mentor station on the way out and sign up and meet with one of the staff who can give you more information. So now I would like to welcome a very special young man to the stage. Vaughn Williams is a senior at Euclid High School and has been with Open Doors Academy since the 8th grade. He is an incredibly young man dedicated to his education and to breaking his own cycle. I'd like to welcome Vaughn Williams to the stage.
Hello, everyone. And I'd like to thank you, Ms. Emily, for that wonderful introduction. Sorry. My name is Vaughn Elijah Williams, and I'm 17. I'm an ODA scholar in the high school program and a senior at Euclid High School. I'm on track to graduate. More than that, I have a plan for my future that makes me feel confident about being successful. I'm here to share my story, but first, you need to know, first time speaking in front of a large group, and I'm a little nervous. That's normal, right? I wasn't always this funny and successful, though. If you met me 5 years ago when I was in 8th grade, you wouldn't recognize me. I was a different person. I even had to repeat the 9th grade to catch up. Do any of you know what it's like to have a cognitive disability? Have you ever struggled to learn something? If you have, then we have something big in common. We are successful despite the odds. We don't let circumstances define and control our future. We also probably have someone strong advocating for us. For me, I have ODA. For most of my education, I was homeschooled by my mom. Unfortunately, I was really behind where I needed to be. So I began public schooling for the first time during the middle of my 8th grade year at Forest Park. If it sounded like a big cultural shock and transition, that's because it was. The academic pace was faster, the material harder. I was shy, I didn't have any friends, and to top it off, I was diagnosed with ADHD. No wonder I was struggling. One day between the hustle and bustle of classes, Mr. J. Rock from Open Doors stopped me in the halls. He asked me to join him in the scholars after school at ODA. It was really cool, so I did. You have probably heard the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. ODA is a part of that village. My dad's a single parent and a hard-working man. He works a lot to provide the best he can. ODA staff like Miss Emma, Mr. Mike, and Mr. Joe have always been there for me. They're my mentors and help me when I needed them. Their encouragement, high expectations, and support help keep me on the path I am on now. The other ODA scholars were a big influence on me too. They became my closest friends. They gave me an emotional outlet when my mom got sick and I was feeling overwhelmed. When both of my big brothers were murdered, they helped me. That was a really difficult time. But my ODA family was there for me. When I experienced new things, I could trust them. For example, I spoke to the scholar that spoke at this event last year. You might remember Yedaya, right? I asked her for tips and support to help me today. By the way, she's doing great at Hiram College, thanks to ODA. It can positively or negatively affect you. When you lack self-confidence and identity, you will lower your standards and be friends with anybody, and that's not a good thing. You are attracted to people you shouldn't be friends with. If it wasn't for ODA, I might not have grown to the person I am today. I would have messed up more, I probably would have made bad decisions, and I probably wouldn't plan for my future. You see, ODA has improved me by helping me find my voice, reinforcing good study habits, connecting me with a positive group of friends, teaching me to deal with stressful situations, and giving me a safe space to go to school. Thanks to ODA, I will graduate high school, I will go to Kent State, and I will earn a degree in social work. I want to be a professional mentor like Mr. Mike and everyone else on the ODA team. I will be successful and I will give back to my community, all thanks to ODA. Now I'm going to ask you to do something for me, scholars like me, and of course for ODA. ODA is getting bigger and better. They serve more scholars than ever. Many of them are like me now, and many of them are like me 5 years ago. They need the high-quality programming that ODA provides. They need those summer camps, service learning trips, and a safe space to get to school. You can help support ODA if everyone here gives $25. We can raise $10,000 for ODA. There are 2 ways you can make a donation today. Use one of the pledge cards at your table, write your pledge and your contact information, or leave a gift right now. Or go online and make a gift from your phone. Visit ODACLE.org. That's ODACLE.org. Come on, everyone. Let's help ODA grow their programs and make a high impact in Cleveland. Help them serve more scholars like me. Don't worry, I'll wait. Okay, I see a lot of you working on making the gift. Thank you. And thank you for being here today to listen and be part of this transformative moment in my life. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Anne-Marie Grassi, or as we call her, Miss Anne-Marie, back to stage.
So, first of all, can we give Vaughn another round of applause? Hardest things we ever do is speak of our own challenges and accomplishments in life. And Vaughn is probably one of the most incredible young men that I have come across in the past 17 years. Vaughn demonstrates incredible perseverance, an incredible drive and desire for himself and for those around him. I had the opportunity this past summer to travel on Vaughn's first trip to Harlan, Kentucky, and my final trip to Harlan, Kentucky. And throughout the week, there were points where, let me just put it this way, there's 40 teenagers, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and only 5 staff. So I just want you to feel the pain for a moment. Just feel that pain. But what I can say about Vaughn is that Vaughn was the young man who, whenever I needed something, was right there. Miss Amory, what can I do? Miss Amory, how can I help? Miss Amory, what do you need? There was a moment of fear on the trip when one of our kids faced a pretty heavy accident, and Vaughn stepped up to the plate, and with tears in his eyes, because Vaughn feels for those around him that he loves, he said, "What can I do? How can I help? Where do you need me?" And it is with that is that incredible ability to show empathy, to respond to a situation, and to always know to do what's right. And so this young man up here, while he speaks of his challenges and growth, really, I want to share with you what an incredible man he is. So again, thank you to Vaughn Williams for all he does. all going to want to mentor him. So I just want to, also, I would not be CEO and president if I didn't do my job and reiterate that there is an opportunity here to give more and to do more. And I know everybody is asked of this question over and over and over and over again. We are not asking you tonight for a major gift, although we welcome them. Don't turn them down. All I'm asking you to consider is get involved. Make a small contribution. $20 is a generous contribution to our kids. There's a lot we can do with that. Get involved. Adopt a family for the holidays. So many of our families go without Christmas every year. They don't have the basic needs. They need things like clothing, boots, winter coats, blankets, sheets, you name it. Even sometimes just Christmas dinner. A lot of our companies come together and will adopt a family or adopt a couple families, and we encourage you to consider that. And like I said, mentor a kid. There is these kids are amazing. And as I said, Vaughn is one of many, although he is a special one. He is one of many, and there are so many incredible opportunities to get involved with ODA. It takes a village to raise a child, and we need you to operationalize as our village and join us in this fight to get our kids to that next step. And with that, I'm going to invite Ray back up to the stage to introduce our keynote speaker. So thank you.
Are we having fun? Before I kind of move on and introduce Leslie, Vaughn really just inspired me to kind of talk a little bit about my background as well. Ed, this is coming out of left field for you, so be ready. I told you you're going to get what you pay for. It was free, so. But in all seriousness, my childhood and growing up was kind of similar to Vaughn's. I did not come from a school-oriented family. I didn't come from money. I definitely had my challenges and struggles as well. I know just growing up in school, middle school through high school, my grades weren't great. I can tell you right now, one time I came home with a 0.8. If anyone knows what a 0.8 is, that's basically straight F's. That's basically terrible. So I got a 0.8, and my stepdad chewed me out. I mean, he probably could have went to jail that night. But it definitely woke me up, and it made me realize that that's unacceptable. And I know just my friend groups and everything like that, they weren't probably helping me either. So I remember just going through high school the same way. I didn't get an 0.8, more like a 2.5. I was working my way up. I was getting there, and in my senior year in high school, I almost got expelled. I almost didn't walk the stage. I'm probably giving you a little bit too much information, but I almost didn't walk the stage. I got into some trouble. Unfortunately, God rest his soul, the teacher that I got in trouble with, I had to kind of have a little sit-down talk with him and apologize to him for what I did. And he's now gone now, but he definitely made a great impact on my life. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, no matter the struggles you go through, or no matter the resources you feel you lack, or no matter the type of support you think you don't have, I think Vaughn and other scholars here at ODA and other students here, and I'm sure many people who are here may have a similar story to mine and Vaughn's. I think we are the true testament that you can really do anything you put your mind to. So just like Anne-Marie said, there's going to be a lot of people trying to mentor him. So just going to throw my name in the hat right now and just say, hey, if you need somebody, I don't got $25, I'm going to record a budget. But if you need somebody, in all honesty, I went to Kent State University too. So if you need someone to kind of, go through, the process with, I can definitely help you out free of charge. I don't charge at all. So if you need me, I'm definitely here for you. So that's my little 2 cents of kind of how I came to, I guess, where I am today. But again, without further ado, I'm going to introduce the, again, one and only Leslie Crutchfield. Of course, she is an author, an educator, the executive director of the Global Social Enterprise Initiative at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. That was long. And the senior advisor at FSG Social Impact Consultants. Leslie, she was previously a managing director. I can't even say this right now, Leslie, so please help me out. Ashoka, the Global Venture Fund for Social Entrepreneurs. She co-founded a national nonprofit, social enterprise in her 20s. Wow, that makes me feel like I need to be doing more. But she has contributed to Fortune, Forbes, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and Stanford Social Innovation Review. She has appeared on programs like Fox, NPR, and ABC News, coming soon, Channel 3, WKYC. Leslie, she served as a trustee of Seed Foundation Kiva and volunteered with Crossroads Africa. She's done a lot in her life. And she also holds an MBA from Harvard, and resides in Washington, D.C., one of my favorite places. And of course, I'm sure you guys have all heard of her books. She's authored How Change Happens, Why Some Movements Succeed While Others Don't, Forces for Good, the 6 Practices of High Impact Nonprofits, and Do More Than Give, the 6 Practices of Donors Who Change the World. And Force for Good, in fact, was featured by The Economist as one of the best books of the year and one of the top 10 business books in 2007. So she's doing a lot. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming, again, the Miss Leslie Crutchfield to the stage.
Great introduction. I have to say it. Hello, Cleveland! Hello. I am so glad to be here and not in Washington, D.C. It's good to get out of the swamp, I gotta tell you. There are a lot of swamp creatures there. Vaughn, I want to tell you, I get the opportunity to travel around the country and speak with community groups like this about my research and the ideas in my books. And I might have given more than 100 speeches, but I get nervous every time. So you're in the same company there. I'm so delighted to be back in Cleveland, actually. I had the opportunity to come give a talk about catalytic philanthropy when I was visiting with the Cleveland Foundation about 6 or 7 years ago when that book, Do More Than Give, came out. And I haven't been back since, but a lot's changed in my life and certainly here. When I've learned about the growth of Open Doors Academy, the impact, Anne-Marie, that you and your team and the scholars have had, it's pretty phenomenal with the college attendance rate, the way you prepare young people for college and the world of work. It's phenomenal to see that impact, and I was so impressed and excited to learn about it. I've been thinking a lot about how the ideas and forces for good can both be applied here and how you're applying them. We're going to talk about all of that today. It's funny, when I think about the college prep aspect of your work, it reminds me of a funny story. So I have 3 little kids at home. One just turned 12 yesterday. My daughter just turned 14 a couple weeks ago, and I have a 6-year-old, 1 girl, 2 boys. And we were all around the dinner table recently musing about where our now almost high schoolers are going to go to college. You know, maybe she'll come to Georgetown where I teach, or she might go to my alma mater or my husband's alma mater, or maybe Kent State now. And I said, wherever in the country Kaylee goes to college, I'm really going to miss her. We love Kaylee so much. And my little 6-year-old, who was in kindergarten at the time, said, I'm really going to miss Kaylee too when she goes to college. By the way, Mom, what's college? So we have some education to do. Vaughn, I'm going to invite you to come mentor my kids. If they grow up to be half the men and women you are, I think I'll have done a good job as a parent. At Georgetown, the Global Social Enterprise Initiative, we think a lot about how you solve complex problems in the world. I teach in the business school. I believe that business and my colleagues think that companies can be a force for good. How do you create shared social, environmental, and economic value in the world? And it's part of a belief that of the big complex challenges we face in the world, whether it's getting the next generation of kids who've never attended college before and their previous generations to go, or solving the big epidemics of our day, the opioid crisis that I know that we struggle with here, all of the challenges that we face. No single player, no single nonprofit or donor, philanthropy or company can solve it, right? We've got to work across sectors and find collective solutions. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And to kind of frame the conversation around Forces for Good, I wanted to tell you another story about one of my kids, my daughter. We're coming up on Halloween, which reminds me that when she was in kindergarten, she loves big cats. She decided to wear a cheetah costume, kind of a velvet bodysuit type costume for Halloween. And it reminds me of the challenges because, you know, each day after Halloween, she wanted to wear the cheetah suit again. No, you can't wear a velvet skin type bodysuit to school every day. You know, and I knew I was going to have challenges with my daughter over wardrobe. I wasn't thinking it was going to happen until high school, but it's hard. We're fighting, and it's complicated. And I want to talk about, as parents, as educators, as people in the community, this idea of a village raising a child. I would say it's not only hard, it's not only complicated, it's complex. And let's talk about complexity for a minute. Social scientists kind of can bucket challenges or problems into three categories, right? There's one type of challenge, one type of problem that you could describe as simple, right? Let's take a simple example, baking a cake. If you put the flour and the sugar and the milk all together and the oil in the pan, put it in the oven, take it out on time, you're gonna eat cake for that birthday party, right? That's a simple challenge. You can follow a recipe, and if you follow the recipe, you get the same outcome every time, right? Other challenges in our world we could describe as complicated. Researchers talk about the idea of getting a spaceship, onto the moon. Incredibly complicated feats of science and engineering and physics, but there's a few things that you can count on, right? You can count on gravity to behave the same way every time. And you can get a machine on the moon. And now Elon Musk is putting a machine on Mars and so much more. But the challenges we face in the social sector are complex. They have elements of complicatedness and simplicity, but they're complex, they're emergent. As we try and solve for problems, they change, right? New challenges crop up, so you've got to adapt, right? And the big issue that I think that we face in our sector, in the nonprofit world, not only here in Cleveland or in Ohio, but across the country, is that for so long, our philanthropy and our nonprofits are often trying to tackle problems as if they're simple, with simple solutions, when a complex solution is needed, right? And when you look at the way, raising a child becomes a good analogy for complexity. I think about my daughter in that cheetah suit. Unlike gravity, you cannot count on children to behave the same way every time. Sometimes you get the equal and opposite effect of what you're looking for as you're working with kids. So you've got to adapt as a parent. And what works with the first kid certainly might not work with the second one. And the third one, God knows if he's going to even live given his allergy to eating any fruit or vegetable or whole food. You've got to adapt. And of course, these are superficial challenges, not anything on the near to what the scholars in ODA are facing. But the point is, to tackle a complex problem, you need a complex solution. And when I look at the work of ODA and many of the other out-of-school programs you've got here that are highly effective, they've got this comprehensive solution of providing the academic enrichment, but the character development, the out-of-school time, everything that they're doing to solve for the greater complexity of how do you do this. I mean, if you look at other solutions in society, let's take education. A simple way to look at education is to say, well, let's fund scholarships. If we can just fund scholarships to get a kid into college who doesn't have the income or the means to get there. That doesn't necessarily solve the problem, because first you got to prepare them, get them ready for college, get them ready for the world of work. How do you support them when they're in college if nobody from their family or in their network has ever experienced such a thing? Like my 6-year-old son said, what's college, right? So there's so much more complexity, not just to getting there, but getting through and leading that life of success. Hospitals, let's take healthcare. It's another example in the healthcare world. It's simple to build a hospital. We got a lot of hospitals here in Cleveland, right? It's expensive, it's hard, but we know the recipe. But getting high quality health care to all, regardless of income, very complex. So we're going to talk about how you solve for the complexity of the problems that we face in this country. And in Forces for Good, the 6 practices of high impact nonprofits, what we did was have the opportunity in this book to study some of the most successful nonprofits at the national level to be founded in recent decades in this country's history and understand all the things they do to tackle the problems that they care about at that ultimate level of complexity. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the organizations that we studied. It was a real range, First of all, I know we've got a City Year Cleveland program. So City Year in the House, we looked at City Year and its national service program. We looked at Teach for America. We looked at Habitat for Humanity. We looked at Feeding America, the nation's network of food banks. We also looked at some interesting organizations like the Heritage Foundation. If you're not a member of the Heritage Foundation, the conservative policy think and action tank down on Mass Ave in Capitol Hill, near where I live, then if you're not a member of Heritage, you might not know they actually have members. They have nearly 1 million members, hundreds of thousands of people writing $25 checks because they believe in these conservative free trade principles. Heritage Foundation looks and acts more like the Sierra Club than they do the liberal think tanks like Brookings and Urbans, and that's one of the reasons why their ideas have had such an impact on where we are in this country with policy and so forth. So we looked at heritage. We also looked at the Exploratorium from the arts and culture space. We'll talk more about all the lessons that we learned from these very high-impact nonprofits that unite them in terms of how they've been able to have impact. And the driving question behind our research was essentially what makes a great nonprofit great. And I was inspired by books like Jim Collins' Good to Great and Built to Last, these business management books. Now, those of us in the nonprofit sector, we often look to the business sector for ideas on management and leadership, but we know at the end of the day, in the nonprofit sector, we're not trying to make a profit, we're trying to make a difference. And so what it takes to be successful in our sector, while we can borrow across the aisle, we needed our own principles and best practices. So let me give you an example of one of the best practices in Forces for Good. We call it advocate and serve. It's a really important principle because high-impact nonprofits refuse to choose between just providing direct services and working in the community on the one hand and advocating for systems change on the other. Now, this insight came as a real surprise to us, first of all, because half of the nonprofits we studied wouldn't have touched advocacy with a 10-foot pole when they first started out. And by the way, all the groups we studied were relatively young. They were founded in the post-civil rights era, so since the early 70s, and had grown from zero to great in a matter of decades. So they wouldn't have touched advocacy. And yet, they all came to start combining advocacy with their service because they realized they couldn't have as much impact without it. Let me give you an example. Feeding America, that network of food banks, moving billions of pounds of food to feed millions of hungry Americans every year. Well, the food bank network really started out as a direct service, right? John Van Hengel, the social entrepreneur, invented the idea of a food bank back in the late 60s. And, then it was a time we had a lot of corporate excess, those slightly damaged box of Kellogg's Corn Flakes, those slightly dented cans of peas. And the insight was warehouse them and then distribute them to hungry people, right? That was the idea. Well, over time, as hunger grew and our response to it, fast forward to the 90s, another time when we had a Republican-controlled Congress, we had the Gingrich Revolution. President Clinton was in office. And we had welfare reform. And at that time, they were going to zero out some programs like TFAP, the Food Assistance Program. It was a $40 million program at the time. And it was then that the food bank network leaders got together under the executive director leadership of Christine Latimerhoff, a nun at the time, and said, we can't let this happen. We can't let these critical government programs go away because we in the private can't have as much impact with what we're doing with corporate donations and working in the communities. So they got organized. They're based in Chicago. They opened an office on Capitol Hill. brought somebody from Department of Agriculture who knew lobbying and how to talk to Congress, and got trained up, tried to understand how can we have an impact so that our laws at the national and state level support what we're trying to do with hunger. Now, lots of groups were involved with that fight, FRAC, Share Our Strength, others, but because Feeding America, with its food bank in almost every congressional district, its millions of volunteers, they were the ones that were able to build the social and political will to not only protect the food assistance program, but expand it, right? So that now you have a $400 million at the time we finished our research. So they were able to dramatically expand resources so that they could do what they do well. And they used this policy change as kind of a lever, right? And that's what great nonprofits do. They use this force of leverage so that a single nonprofit can have outsized impact compared to its, maybe one staff or budget, right? And the way they have this leverage, the way they have outside impact, they kind of punch above their weight, is they look to government. How can we change policy? Because we could maybe serve a few hundred people through our program, but how much more impact could we have if it was statewide or national? They look for levers in the business world. How can we work with and through companies, harness market forces to drive forward our goals? How do we work with other nonprofits through nonprofit networks so that we can all join hands and create a rising tide that lifts all the boats? And how do we work with individual community members? So they look at the four sectors around them, looking for these points of leverage. And at the end of the day, what they're really doing is building movements. So let me give you another example of how high-impact nonprofits are different than their average performing peers. We call it Make Markets Work, and it's all about how they work with and through the private sector, the corporate sector. One of the examples we talk about is in the realm of the environment. Environmental Defense Fund. The president, Fred Krupp, likes to tell this story. If you read, today, a lot of environmentalists are focused on climate action, carbon. We see what's going on, with regulation rollbacks and businesses standing up and saying we're going to keep our commitments. But go back a couple decades, and the big issue in the environmental realm was, our landfills are overflowing, our solid waste problem, and our waterways are polluted. And the environmentalists at that time, were in a very antagonistic stance against business. And Environmental Defense Fund was one of the groups we studied. They saw it a different way. Fred Krupp tells this story of sitting at a McDonald's with his 3 sons. And at the end, you can imagine in the 90s, there was this kind of big pile of trash. And he looked at his elder son and said, we got to help McDonald's do better. Tried to get a meeting with the CEO of McDonald's. Eventually, after 2 years, sat down and said, we don't want to take any money from the company, but we'd like to do an audit of all of your operations. Figure out how you could become more environmentally sustainable with all of your packaging and waste. Eventually, McDonald's took the recommendations, phased out those styrofoam clamshells that the Big Macs used to be in. I see some nods. You've all had the Big Macs. My children are happy once a week. They're Happy Meals. And then they reduced the amount of solid waste by 100,000 metric tons over a period of time. Again, back to this point about leverage. By getting McDonald's to change its ways, they could impact through the billions and billions of consumers served through that company, reducing the amount of packaging waste, bringing in recycled materials. And then the further leverage is, of course, all the other fast food joints, KFC, Wendy's, they got to follow suit because they can't have so much packaging, right? So if you can get a ripple effect in getting companies to change. So that's one way we saw nonprofits working with companies. Many of them also just do your classic corporate partnerships, cause marketing relationships. City Year has its corporate partners on its teams, underwriting the programs, company employee engagement, volunteering, just like ODA is asking you to put your name on that card, give some sweat equity to the causes. Some of the nonprofits we studied actually launched a business, like a for-profit subsidiary. That wasn't a silver bullet as much as we love to talk about social enterprise these days, but it was part of the mix. The advice I always give nonprofits when you're thinking about how to work with the business community is, we in the nonprofit sector often look at companies with dollar signs in our eyes. Sorry, you kind of look like an ATM, right, to a development director. But you got to think about what is the assets that a company has to give, because it's so much bigger than whatever's in the corporate foundation, their entire employee base, that volunteer base, right? What knowledge does a company have? I think about PNC and its Grow Up Great initiative. They committed to try and increase early childhood access in this country. One of the planks of that program is that they trained all of their bank presidents using their advocacy and lobbyists. You know, banks are a highly regulated industry. What do they know? They know how to lobby. So they trained on how to lobby, not in the bank's interest, but on how do we advance early childhood policies that can benefit all. So they use different assets in the company. So think about what you have to offer, your knowledge, your employees, as well as your money, your time. The third practice that I wanted to share with you we call nurturing nonprofit networks. And it's really interesting. When you look at a high-impact organization and Forces for Good, you see that they treat the other nonprofits a little differently. They don't see them as competitors for scarce resources, scrambling for dollars, or that spot on the evening news in prime time. They say, how can we collaborate to advance larger causes, to advance larger movements, right? So that, again, we can get that rising tide that can lift all the boats. You know, at breakfast this morning, I was with some of the leaders from ODA and also Boys and Girls Clubs and Deaconess Foundation and other institutions that are equally committed to trying to lift up all lives of young people here in Cleveland. And they recognize that we've got to work together, and together we can be stronger and have greater impact than if we're constantly trying to fight and compete. Inspiring evangelists is another really great example. The best nonprofits don't treat volunteers, their donors, their community members as simply a means to an end. They create a community, right? And the people who live in the neighborhoods, the parents of the scholars that you're working with, become part of the movement. And I see so much of that happening with ODA. Vaughn told me that, I asked him, what's the one thing you remember most from the first year you were a scholar in this program? And what'd you say? The Christmas dinner. And how powerful that was, and the first time a chance to do something like that with your family all together. Great nonprofits take the time to create these emotional, visceral experiences that are very real, and that's what inures people to the cause. And then they're able to have ripple effects throughout the community. You know, I also think about the Exploratorium. Is very good at building community engagement and also working through other networks. And how many people here have been to the Exploratorium in San Francisco? Just a few people. Well, is there a children's museum here in Cleveland? So if you've been to the Children's Museum, if you've been to any of the 600 children or science museums around the world, then you've experienced the power of the Exploratorium. Because when the Exploratorium was founded by Frank Oppenheimer, the brother of Robert Oppenheimer, back in the 70s, his idea, he was a physicist, his idea was how do we change the way people experience and think about museums in this country. So, you know, they said we're going to have interactive phenomena. We're going to make a museum a place where you come and learn and do things, right? Have experiences. And by doing that, the Exploratorium only has one site. But they also said we're going to train other museums, other institutions on how to build this interactive exhibitry, right? So they published cookbooks with recipes. It's very hard to do interactive exhibits. You need physicists, you need scientists, as well as artists. But they gave it away, right? Let me give you an example of just how much the museum field has changed since I started writing books and having kids. If you ever come to Washington around Christmas time, it's really fun to go see the White House Christmas tree lighting. And around the trees, they have these trains that run, and the kids try and throw pennies in the back of the trains. And my son, who was then 4 at the time, was having a really hard time, wasn't getting any pennies into the cargo of the train. So I said, we'll come back during the day, since it was so dark, and we'll try again. So the next day I had a chance. I drove him down, and we did the pennies, and we happened to park right in front of the Corcoran Gallery, which is this beautiful gallery of modern art right near the White House. And I had a few extra minutes on the parking meter. So I said, Quinn, we've got some time. Let's check out this museum right here. So we went into the Corcoran Museum and we checked out some of the paintings and looked, and he said after about 5 minutes, he goes, "Mommy, let's get out of here." And I was like, "Why? You don't like the exhibits?" He's like, "Well, you said we were going to go to a museum. This isn't a museum, this is just a picture store." You know, and his whole notion of what it means to go to a museum is to do stuff, to learn, to interact, right? So the impact of that has been far greater than one institution sitting on the wharf in San Francisco now, where it moved. And the great nonprofits think this way. So I've seen, for instance, with Outdoor Academy, now you have this Institute for Outdoor Learning, where you're trying to codify and understand what's worked so well with your out-of-school interventions that you can share, because ODA isn't going to replicate to necessarily every community across Ohio or around the nation, but if you can share that knowledge, that's how the great nonprofits think. They're on a relentless drive to see how much impact we can have. And they'll use all the tools at their disposal, right? They give away the knowledge, they publish it. If they need to advocate, they'll go to Capitol Hill, they'll go to the state capitol and advocate for better things for the cause they care about. If they can work with companies, find a way to work through the private sector, they'll do that, right? There's this great quote in Forces for Good from the Environmental Defense Fund, head of corporate partnerships, Gwen Ruda. And she says, if we need to sue them, we'll sue them. Environmental Defense Fund started out as a public interest law firm. The first thing they did was bring lawsuits against the spraying of DDT, a toxic pesticide that was killing endangered species in Long Island. So they'll sue them if they need to sue them. If they need to advocate, they'll advocate for policy change. If we need to partner with them, we'll partner with them. We will do whatever it takes to advance this cause. And it makes them do really counterintuitive things. That story about Environmental Defense Fund I told you, when they partnered with McDonald's, they got so much flack from the environmental movement. How can you talk to corporations? You're doing deals with the devil. MBAs are taking over the environmental movement, right? And they said, we're not really in the business of trying to put business out of business. We're trying to protect and preserve the environment. So if we need to work with business, and that's the best way through billions of consumers to impact the environment, we'll do that. And by the way, if there's a lot of corporate wrongdoing, we'll sue them too, right? So nonprofits are very adaptive. And that goes to the final point, which is that great nonprofits master the art of adaptation. They're constantly looking at what's changing in the field, and back to this of the complexity of the problem. So, they're constantly learning, and they go through a basic learning cycle, like those of you who are engineers or math, interested in math, the Deming cycle. It starts with, being able to look at a problem, identify opportunities or challenges or threats out in the environment, then innovate new programs that work, then step back, reflect, evaluate through objective measures, is it working or not, and then revise accordingly. And if you can go through that learning cycle, then you can adapt to whatever the changing circumstances are. Great nonprofits aren't afraid to do that, and they invest the resources so that they can constantly be tackling the next challenge that's coming around the bend. So if I had to sum it up, and what I saw in the high-impact nonprofits and Forces for Good, it's this. They use all these levers in their relentless pursuit of impact. And to do that, at the end of the day, they build movements. They don't just build organizations. They don't just replicate or scale out or add a new program or service. They're building a larger field, right? The big vision for City Year wasn't just to have a City Year in every city, although there's a couple dozen in the country now. It was that one day, the most commonly asked question of a young person in this country is what? What are you asking? Exact. Well, we got Randy here, who was a founder of City Year Cleveland. Typically you might say, well, Vaughn, where are you going to college? Or where are you getting a job? The most commonly asked question City Year wants is, where'd you do your service year, right? Habitat for Humanity, their vision, make poverty housing politically, economically, morally unacceptable in the world, right? They have these big, hairy, audacious goals, and they won't stop until they've exhausted every avenue to solve for those problems. That's what makes great nonprofits great. I think that's what we see here in ODA and many of the nonprofits that are around the table in this lunchroom. And I hope that if you're able to embrace some of the practices and forces for good, that each of you can become even stronger forces for good too. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Leslie. That was, of course, very informative and awesome. And I'm sure we all learned so much from that. So we're going to now do the panel conversation discussion. Just want to let you know there is some Q&A index cards at the table. ODA scholars, they're going to be checking with guests at the table just to see if anyone has a question that they would like to ask. You guys can write that down on the index cards and in boxes at each of your tables. I'm sure you all have one. And then ODA scholars, it's going to be their job to collect those index cards, and then they're going to bring them up here, and then we're going to get those questions to our guests. So if you could, maybe just write out your questions right now if you have some. That's going to help me out, and it's going to make my job a lot easier. And so go right ahead. But as you write those questions out, I'm going to introduce some of our guests here. So I'm going to start with Kristen Morris. Kristen Morris, she is the Chief Government and Community Affairs Officer for the Cleveland Clinic. She joined the clinic after spending over a decade working in legislative affairs for the American Hospital Association. So please give Kristen a hand. And our next guest is Angie Napoli. Where is she? Oh, I'm sorry. So it's his fault. It's his fault. No, Augie, I'm sorry, and you did introduce yourself to me, so I apologize. But Augie, we all know him. He is the president and CEO of the United Way of Greater Cleveland. He and the United Way, of course, their team are revamping their work to focus on and alleviating poverty. And then Augie, of course, he worked at the Cleveland Museum. He was the art director of development. Right? Am I saying all these things correctly? Say that again. Deputy director, my bad, of development, raising a lot of money, millions of dollars to renovate the museum and to expand programming in our community, of course. Please give Augie a hand. And next up, Randy McShepard. He is the Vice President and Chief Talent Officer for RPM International, Inc. Before RPM, Randy founded Policy Bridge, a local think tank addressing social and economic issues, and he served on many local nonprofit boards, including the Sisters of Charity, who are here with us today. So give Randy and, of course, all of our guests a big round of applause. So am I sitting down with them or no? Yes or no? Okay. So are we gonna, so Ed, please gotta lead the way on this. Are we gonna collect the note cards right now?
All the scholars, if you guys would begin collecting the Q&A cards from the guests at your table, I'll collect them up here, and I will bring them up to the guest panel, all right? But I'd love to start by asking our guest panelists what their takeaways from Leslie's keynote is.
Well, I'll start, just because actually I loved your book. There's a couple of things that really spoke to me. First of all, I some people have heard me speak before. I'm going to stand up actually, so that I have to look around. I can't believe I get paid to do what I do. I mean, when you think about the way this country was founded, that we have this belief around democracy, that everybody that works in the state or the city or in Washington, we hire. They work for us in 2 weeks. Every single person in this room has a chance to really voice that position again. And if we don't like what's going on, I mean, literally it's our fault. And the idea that we have that moral and like awesome, cool responsibility to advocate for whether it be, Open Doors Academy or healthcare or education or, your spiritual beliefs, whatever it might be, that is awesome. And then, when you think about it, I just looked at it and I did a little Google search. Today, the 7,089th piece of legislation was introduced in the House of Representatives. So do you think that all those 435 people in the House know every single one of those bills that they're supposed to opine upon? If we don't help really provide credible, relational, trusted guidance on the things that we think are important to society, then you're going to get ignorant things happening. And I think that's part of what we're seeing happen a little bit. It's not like there's evil or bad people. There's just a disconnect in terms of what we believe and what is maybe happening. And I think some of us have that responsibility. So I get paid to actually do that on behalf of the Cleveland Clinic. And I've been in Washington for 30 years and was an advocate there and worked in government. And so literally, like I said, I can't believe I get paid to do something that all of us should be doing anyway. So what Leslie's point was, and I'm sorry I'm getting on the soapbox here a little bit, but I think Leslie pointed out really effectively, is that idea that we can actually create the environment in which we want to live and work and grow in. And that message around advocacy and connecting it with mission and business is just so critical. So anyway, I could go through all 6 of yours because I related to every 6 of the steps, but I really wanted to put a big exclamation point and make sure that right on 29th and Euclid, if you haven't had a chance to vote, you think you might forget, just do it right after lunch today. There's no lines. You can do it right now. So I just wanted to reinforce that, so thanks.
Can I respond? I ditto what she just said. Absolutely, it's our own fault. We have the power in our hands. That's the thing about this country. That's the thing about our community. Who here is from the United Way of Greater Cleveland? Raise your hand. Where are you? I saw a couple of you. Okay.
You're on your own, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm on my own. Okay, well, don't tell them I said this. No, the thing that really resonated for me in what Leslie said, and I would call your attention if you purchase the book, page 249. It's all there. That's the story. That's what we've been saying at United Way. That's the transition and the transformation we're trying to make in this organization for this community. The whole notion of the only power that the United Way of Greater Cleveland has is to write a check is just false. Equally strong and powerful that capability that we have is to advocate and to give voice to that which is underserved and understood in our community. And we also have the ability and the strength, just as strong as writing a check or doing that advocacy, but to convene, to bring people together to solve the problem, to recognize problems, to recognize the fact that no one organization can do this alone. But the leverage that you spoke of, I think, is hugely important, the power that is within this community. It's not a lack of money, it's not a lack of brains. This is a very smart community, a very smart room full of people here and all over Northeastern Ohio. And it isn't a lack of money. Think about it. The Say Yes to Education effort is raising probably $125 million at this time to provide a pool of scholarships in conjunction with, in collaboration with organizations like United Way that are helping to provide the pathway from 0 to 12th grade so they can take advantage of it. The money is in this community for it. What's lacking is the will, our willingness to not see our name over every door, but to work together to solve some of these problems. So your book really resonated with me. I think it's fantastic what you're doing, and I can't wait for the next one. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I congratulated Leslie. I'll do it again. I, too, love the book. It was a trip down memory lane for me, being so involved with City Year and reading some of the programs and initiatives that I was involved with here in Cleveland as well as in Boston. I also met Billy Shore through City Year and read his book and got to know about Share Our Strength. I certainly would echo that the whole issue of advocacy and the programmatic side of things are both critically important. When the thing I thank City Year for is that they really taught me a lot about the importance of advocacy and lobbying. The first real work I did on the Hill was with City Year. I mean, we were really fighting long and hard for AmeriCorps to be sustained year after year. And we used to say, if Michael Brown, the founder of City Year, used to say, and we use this on the Hill quite effectively, if the military is the national defense, national service, community service is the national offense. And it really resonated with a lot of policymakers, and it really is a great example of how organizations like City Year and Habitat and others really thought about and communicated the importance of lobbying and making their importance, or the importance of their work known. I co-founded a think tank called Policy Bridge, and the reason that I was involved in that is we realized after scanning Northeast Ohio that the streets of Cleveland are littered with programs, but when you really stop and think about it, someone in Columbus or Washington, D.C. is actually making the decision about how that program ultimately will be funded. So if you don't think about the fact that if it's education, there's a Department of Education. If it's economic development, well, we have a labor secretary. Or if it's, I mean, I could go on and on, right? There's people at the higher level that make these decisions, and if you're not figuring out how they can help you to further your cause, you're sort of missing the boat. And that's a lot of what was so well stated in your booklet. So I too loved everything, you know, all those organizations I know to some extent, and it was just really fun to get to know them a bit more after reading your book and being reminded of those 6 key elements that you talked about.
Thank you. Yeah, if I could just respond. First of all, thanks. There's a big theme of advocacy here. And, you know, we did a second edition of the book where we went back and we looked at how nonprofits advocate and serve at the local level, right? Because I've written about national groups, but most groups are local, operating on well under $1 million budget. And there's, you know, a great story about a criminal justice system reform story out of Connecticut. And I think it's very applicable to other communities because, you know, Connecticut was one of the biggest incarcerator of young people and adults. They have a small population, but they had so many inmates, they were shipping them down to Virginia for incarceration. And an organization had come up with a nonprofit, had an intervention that would really work to curb recidivism of juvenile offenders. And I'm going to simplify it, but it had to do with having a mentor, an adult, work with you when you came out of the system, not for 6 months, but for 18 months, and having that individual, strong relationship with that one person, which was a long enough time to get you not going back to the habits and the communities that you were in before. It's more expensive to have a caseworker over 18 months than 6 months, but they realized they were able to dramatically cut the recidivism rates, right? So here's an example of an intervention that works. Then what they did in coming out of this RIASAP coalition in Connecticut, they made a Juvenile Justice Alliance. They got a startup grant from a private family foundation, the Tal Foundation. It was a relatively small grant, it was $25,000. And the nonprofits came together and jointly hired a half-time lobbyist. No one nonprofit had to take on and know how to do it anyway, but they got somebody who then could go and advocate at the state level so that all the communities would have access to this intervention, thus driving down recidivism rates. They also advocated for other things like raising the age to 18 instead of 16 that you went to adult prison if you committed a stronger crime, closing down the big central facility and moving treatment programs and facilities closer to home. So they made changes across the system. But by taking up, you know, if you've got a great intervention that's really working, like the curriculum at Open Doors Academy, how can the community hold that up and then go advocate for being able to have every child have access to an intervention like that? And like you said, you know, most communities have the means. You have the money. You're spending a lot of money on jails and other things. Do you have the political and social will to move some of that into these constructive solutions rather than dealing with, you know, it on the back end? And that takes voting, right? So you got to put people in power that can make those decisions for what's best for the future. There's great stories at the local level of how they've embraced advocacy, and you don't have to come to Washington, which I don't recommend right now for anyone.
So, is this on? Yep. Okay, so a good segue here to what you were just talking about. Here's a question asking, how has the current political climate impacted, and this says, your organization's objectives positively or negatively? What can be done? So I guess what I would say is just how does politics play a role in how it affects what a nonprofit, I guess, does? Because I don't know if this question is specifically for you, but if you could just maybe talk about just how politics play a role and how nonprofits work, and just kind of talk about that relationship and how, at least in today's politics, how would that have a negative or positive impact?
Well, I was just going to say, I think that the way that I heard the message is like, it's a pretty toxic environment right now. I mean, we have this, there's nothing that I can say that I don't think you all have heard, whether it be through the advertisements or the news, that it's very polarizing. And, when you think about the purpose of a not-for-profit, just like Augie said, we're supposed to convene and bring together. And when everything is red team, blue team, or left or right, or up or down, or whatever, it gets really challenging for us to sort of get people to push that aside and come together. But it does happen. I mean, and I find, I don't know, I just find right now, despite the noise that we hear from whether it be Washington or on the TV, I can only speak about what I feel locally. I feel so much power here locally. I mean, there's something like that, just, we're at that leverage point of something really big happening. So even though it feels like, oh, there's all this doom and gloom and frustration out there, I think that, and I hope I'm not so Pollyannish and you're gonna be like, who's that girl like in charge of government relations for this organization? She's so positive and ignorant. I really believe the city is gonna like blow it out of the water. We're doing, I mean, we speaking of the water metaphor, I mean, we just have so much going for us. So I think that is just, I'm looking at that as just entertainment. I think we can change it over time if we show up and vote. I'll say that like 4 more times. If we show up and vote, I think we can change it and improve upon it, but that is not getting in our way to do really great work here on the ground, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, I think you're right, but let me go to the cynical side of this. Don't be distracted by all of that noise. That's strategic, and that's a personal opinion. They strategically want to distract you with all of this craziness that's going on in Washington from the real issues. Don't be distracted by it. We have the power to make a difference in the community, and that's where advocacy comes in. But I have to tell you, from a nonprofit perspective, there's nothing like a crisis situation to galvanize leadership within an organization. We've had a public policy agenda at the United Way of Greater Cleveland, and it's been a good one. But we have a great one now, and a great one is emerging as a result of the awareness that we all have that we have to take matters into our own hands. We, along with all of you, together. So, there's a lot of power in that negativity as well, and it helps to galvanize an organization, I think, and you can see it in our policy statement, which will be posted shortly online. But for sure, don't be distracted by all of that. That is strategic. They want you to pay attention to all of that crazy talk that's going on, so you are not paying attention while they get reelected and get back in. So that's just my opinion.
I can speak from a national perspective. Well, first of all, I think the polarization and the tribalism that we're experiencing now is real, and it is measurably different. If you look at Pew polls, it wasn't just about a decade ago that if you asked a Republican how he felt about a Democrat, a very small percentage would say that most Republicans would say, I disagree with that Democratic policy, but we worship together, we golf together, we like each other. It was about 5% that said, no, I actually not only think that the Democrat is wrong, headed in their policy, I think they are actively trying to hurt the country. And same thing for Democrats about Republicans. That's flipped now. Almost half in polls will say, I not only disagree with you because you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, I think you are really trying to hurt the country with what you're trying to do, and I don't like you. So that common ground, that comedy that used to exist has gone, and it's coming from both sides. I put blame on all sides. It's not one party or the other. I mean, here's a little example. In DC now, on Match.com and the dating apps, what's the first filter No one will cross a party line to go on a date. It didn't used to be that way. And there's Democrat bars and Republican bars, and it is a microcosm of the sickness that has enveloped the country. So it's real, and so you got to deal with it, there's very scant common ground now with that polarization that you can get a leg on. When I think about the changes in the book. Environmental Fence Fund invented a cap and trade solution, which is the reason why we don't have acid rain here in Ohio, right? We had a huge acid rain problem in the 90s. That was another big climate issue. How did we get a cap and trade policy to reduce sulfur? Well, it was the first George Bush, who ran on a platform of wanting to be the environmental president, in contrast to Reagan. Can you imagine a Republican running on an environmental platform now? No, that has disappeared. So nonprofits are going to have to be even more creative about how you create those common ground solutions, because most people want that. They don't want to exist in this world. And the only way to do it, I look at the research for Forces for Good led to this idea that movements, the great nonprofits build movements, right? This next book that there's a couple copies out there, How Change Happens, is all about why some movements succeed and others don't. And we're in an age of movements, right? It was the populist movement that elected our current president. When you look at Me Too or Black Lives Matter or Life and Choice, there's so many other movements that are fomenting kind of against the anvil of this presidency. And so to get those systemic solutions, you've got to advocate, you've got to agitate, and you got to keep serving and doing the important work on the community level. And talk about complexity. I think that describes what we're in.
The next question is, what are the top constraints that keep nonprofits from being great?
The top constraints, I'm sure I'm a recovering executive director of a nonprofit, so I can relate to many of you. Fundraising, paying for the day-to-day operations is something that kept me up at night. I would go to bed thinking about all the employees that work for me and their families, and if I couldn't raise enough money, and not only would I have to let them go, but I'm impacting their families. So I think that's a big piece of it. I would also say, being a past co-chair of the Organizational Assessment Committee for United Way, that boards have to be a lot better at their work. They have to care about the organizations, they have to do the work, they have to roll up their sleeves, they have to raise money, they have to be ambassadors. All those things matter. I'm a corporate grant maker. Executive directors, obviously, they're going to tell me how great their organizations are. It's a different story when a board member says how great those organizations are and what they're doing and how they're giving. Now you have my attention. So I really believe that if you have a great board, you mitigate a lot of the challenges with raising money, and if you have the resources that you need, you can then run successful, impactful programs. So those are two that jump out. I would also say, and I can say this, many people can't, but I can say it also as a member of the George Gunn Foundation Board and several other foundation boards, that foundations oftentimes are schizophrenic. They change their mind every 2 or 3 years. It's a different focus area, so you're trying to kind of keep up with what the market is saying or offering. So that too can be challenging and distracting for nonprofit organizations. And the fourth thing I'll say, you're probably sorry you asked now, is organizations do need to have a strategic plan. They need to have some documented evidence of where they think they're headed and how they're going to get there. And it should never be guesswork when a funder asks, what are you trying to accomplish? Where are you headed? What do you want to get done? So those are 3 or 4 things that just come to mind in one man's opinion.
Well, I would agree with all 4 of those things, but from the nonprofit management perspective, when we look out in the landscape of nonprofits in the human service space, first of all, there are many, many, many. And the preponderance of funding is coming from the public sector. The struggle to drift away from your core mission to accommodate dollars coming in from a government program, it creeps up on you, and you need to be mindful of that. Now, having said that, I appreciate and understand the struggle you have to meet and make ends meet each year. And so we're looking at, in a way, we moved away from operational funding a few years ago to program funding strictly. And, you know, it's not having the impact that it could and should have in the delivery system. You know, there is no flexibility. You all know that. Open Doors knows that. Every penny you get from external sources have strings attached to them. So can we add value to our community by providing you the resources for technical assistance, I think, and the like. I think you're going to see more of that coming through the community hub model. But I want to say a word about board leadership, you know, and not just because Oswald is sitting here, but, you know, we've just had the step down of a board chair for the past 2.5 years, who is, in my mind, and I've been doing this a lot of years, a model volunteer, a model director of a nonprofit organization who totally gets the public service notion here. You don't have to run for office and be elected to be a public servant. You can be a public servant by being a volunteer leader. And Mark Burns, who is the chairman of Oswald Company, really exemplifies that. Now, there are many others in our community, but because Oswald is